In this episode, we move into a topic that some new learners expect to be soft, vague, or secondary, only to discover that it sits very close to the center of trustworthy security work. Technical knowledge matters, but organizations do not place their confidence in knowledge alone. They place confidence in how people behave when they have access to systems, data, decisions, and influence over outcomes that can affect many others. That is why professional conduct, due care, due diligence, and the ethics associated with International Information System Security Certification Consortium, ISC2, belong in a foundational certification. They remind you that cybersecurity is not just about whether you can understand a control or recognize a threat. It is also about whether you can be trusted to act responsibly, honestly, carefully, and with respect for the people and organizations affected by your decisions. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at CyberAuthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Professional conduct is the everyday expression of that trust. It includes how you handle information, how you speak about risks, how you respond to pressure, how you represent your own knowledge, and how you behave when no one is standing over your shoulder. Beginners sometimes imagine professional conduct as a formal topic reserved for managers or senior leaders, but that is not how it works in practice. Even an entry-level worker can expose sensitive data, ignore a warning sign, hide a mistake, misuse access, or cut a corner that creates real harm. In the same way, even a new professional can strengthen trust by being careful, truthful, respectful, and disciplined about following security expectations. Professional conduct matters because cybersecurity work often happens in places where people cannot personally verify everything you do. They rely on your judgment, your restraint, and your willingness to act in ways that protect others even when taking a shortcut might feel easier in the moment. Ethics helps answer the deeper question underneath professional conduct, which is not only what can I do, but what should I do? Laws, policies, and procedures matter, but they do not always cover every situation with perfect clarity. Real work often includes gray areas, conflicting pressures, incomplete information, and moments when the fastest path is not the most responsible one. Ethics provides a way to think through those situations by focusing on honesty, fairness, responsibility, and the duty to avoid causing harm where reasonable care can prevent it. This matters in cybersecurity because the field gives people access to powerful visibility, sensitive systems, and sometimes uncomfortable truths about weaknesses in their own organization. Without ethics, technical skill can become reckless, self-serving, or quietly dangerous. With ethics, the same skill is more likely to be used in ways that deserve trust, support the mission, and respect the people whose information and opportunities may be affected by security decisions. One of the most important ethical habits is understanding that cybersecurity professionals are not only protecting technology. They are also protecting the conditions that allow people to work, communicate, receive services, preserve privacy, and trust that important systems are being handled responsibly. That bigger picture matters because it changes how you view the purpose of security work. A beginner who thinks only about systems may become obsessed with technical correctness while missing the human consequences of carelessness or poor judgment. A beginner who understands the ethical side starts to see that every safeguard, every report, every access decision, and every communication can affect real people in practical ways. Security then becomes less about technical performance alone and more about stewardship. You are helping care for something that belongs to others, supports others, or affects others, which means your conduct must be shaped by more than convenience, curiosity, or personal pride. Due care is one of the key ideas that helps turn ethics into practical behavior. At a simple level, due care means taking the level of caution and responsibility that a reasonable person or organization should take under the circumstances. It is about acting with the seriousness the situation deserves instead of behaving carelessly and then pretending the harm was unavoidable. If you know information is sensitive, due care means you handle it in a way that reflects that knowledge. If you know a system is important to business operations, due care means you do not treat changes to it casually. If you are responsible for protecting access, Do care means you do not ignore obvious warning signs or leave risky conditions unaddressed when a reasonable safeguard is within reach. For beginners, do care is helpful because it keeps ethics from sounding abstract. It asks whether you behaved with appropriate caution and responsibility, not whether you can explain yourself after the fact. Another way to hear do care is as the duty to avoid preventable harm by doing what reasonably should have been done. That does not mean perfection, and it does not mean every bad outcome proves someone failed. Security work happens in complex environments where some risk always remains. But do care does mean that you do not shrug off clear responsibility, ignore known exposure, or fail to act when the need for action is reasonably obvious. A person showing due care locks the door that should be locked, protects the record that should be protected, escalates the concern that should be escalated, and handles sensitive work with a level of seriousness that matches the potential consequences. That is why due care is closely tied to professional conduct. It is not just a legal-sounding phrase. It is the habit of behaving in a way that says I understand my responsibility here, and I will not treat that responsibility lightly simply because no one is watching me every second. Due diligence is closely related, but it points to a different part of responsible behavior. If due care is about taking appropriate protective action, due diligence is about the ongoing effort to investigate, review, verify, and stay informed so that those actions are based on reasonable understanding rather than guesswork. It is the work of checking, assessing, and following through instead of assuming everything is fine because no one has raised a complaint yet. A beginner can think of due diligence as the discipline of not being passive. You ask questions, confirm facts, evaluate conditions, review risk, and make sure important responsibilities are not left floating without ownership. In security, that might include reviewing access regularly, checking whether controls are actually working, examining a vendor before trust is extended, or following up on a warning instead of assuming someone else will eventually handle it. Due diligence supports good judgment because it replaces casual assumption with informed attention. The difference between due care and due diligence becomes clearer when you place them side by side. Due care is the responsible action you take to protect something properly. Due diligence is the effort you make to understand what protection is needed, whether it is working, and whether conditions have changed in a way that requires more attention. You can think of due diligence as the careful investigation and follow-through that informs and supports due care. If an organization says it values secure access, due diligence helps it review who has access, why they have it, and whether that access still makes sense. Due care is then reflected in the actual enforcement of proper access controls and the removal of unnecessary privileges. Beginners often confuse the two because both involve responsibility, but the distinction matters. Due diligence asks, are we paying enough attention and checking what needs to be checked? While due care asks, are we actually behaving and acting with the appropriate level of caution once we know what needs to be done? A simple workplace example makes the relationship easier to remember. Imagine a team responsible for protecting employee payroll data. Due diligence would include understanding the sensitivity of that data, reviewing who currently has access, checking whether access assignments still match job roles, and verifying that the existing controls are still appropriate. Due care would include actually restricting access to the right people, protecting records from exposure, enforcing handling expectations, and responding appropriately if a weakness is identified. If the team never reviews access and simply assumes old permissions are still fine, due diligence is weak. If the team notices that access is too broad and does nothing meaningful to fix it, due care is weak. The strongest professional posture combines both. You investigate and remain attentive, and then you act responsibly on what you learn instead of collecting concerns without follow-through or applying controls without understanding whether they truly fit the risk. This is where ethics and professional conduct meet everyday behavior in a very practical way. Ethical cybersecurity work does not only mean avoiding obviously bad behavior such as theft, sabotage, or intentional misuse. It also means being honest about what you know and do not know, being careful with authority you have been given, and resisting the temptation to hide uncertainty behind technical language or confident-sounding claims. A new professional may feel pressure to sound more certain than they really are, especially in security conversations where expertise is valued. Ethical conduct means resisting that pressure and speaking truthfully enough that others can make informed decisions. It also means not overstating your own competence, not signing off on work you do not understand, and not treating access as a personal privilege rather than a business responsibility. Trust is strengthened when people know you will represent reality as clearly as you can, even when that honesty is inconvenient or humbling. Confidentiality is another place where professional conduct becomes very visible. Security workers often know things that others do not, including weaknesses, incidents, internal conversations, sensitive records, or pending changes that could affect many people. Ethical conduct means handling that visibility with restraint rather than curiosity, gossip, or casual sharing. Just because you can see something does not mean you should explore it further without purpose. And just because you learn something sensitive does not mean you should talk about it loosely outside the appropriate channel. Due care shows up in how you protect that information from accidental or unnecessary exposure. Due diligence shows up in making sure you understand the rules, classifications, and expectations that apply before assuming a piece of information is safe to share. For beginners, this is a very important lesson because misuse of sensitive information is not always dramatic. It often begins with ordinary carelessness, misplaced confidence, or the false idea that internal access means unrestricted personal freedom. Professional conduct also includes the willingness to report concerns and escalate issues responsibly rather than hoping they disappear. Beginners sometimes fear that speaking up about a risk, a mistake, or a suspicious situation will make them look inexperienced or difficult. In fact, thoughtful escalation is often a sign of maturity, because it shows you understand that protecting the organization sometimes requires raising uncomfortable truths before harm grows larger. This does not mean sounding alarmed about everything. It means using appropriate channels, communicating clearly, and refusing to let fear or embarrassment keep you silent when a real concern deserves attention. Ethical behavior includes owning mistakes, reporting issues honestly, and not hiding problems to protect your image. Due care appears when you recognize that silence can create avoidable harm. Due diligence appears when you gather enough information to communicate the concern responsibly and follow through until it reaches someone who can evaluate or address it properly. Another part of ethical conduct is how you respond to pressure from others. In real workplaces, security decisions can be influenced by deadlines, politics, convenience, budget concerns, or the impatience of people who simply want access or want a rule waived quickly. A beginner may assume ethics is tested only in dramatic moments, but often it is tested in these ordinary pressures where someone asks you to ignore a process, share information too freely, approve something without enough review, or look the other way because the shortcut seems harmless. Professional conduct means you do not surrender your judgment just because the request comes from a confident person, a senior person, or a frustrated person. It means you remain respectful while still protecting the standards that exist for good reason. Due care helps you recognize that shortcuts can create harm beyond the immediate moment. Due diligence helps you ask the questions that reveal whether the pressure being applied is justified or whether important risk is being pushed downward onto others without proper consideration. Ethics also shapes how cybersecurity professionals treat fairness, respect, and the dignity of others. Security controls affect real people, and responsible professionals remember that those people are not obstacles standing in the way of a perfect technical design. They are employees, customers, students, patients, partners, and community members whose work and lives can be affected by how security is implemented and communicated. This does not mean weakening necessary protection to avoid discomfort. It means avoiding arrogance, unnecessary intrusion, careless surveillance, and dismissive treatment of the people who must live with the process. A strong ethical posture asks whether a control is proportionate, whether privacy has been respected, whether communication is honest, and whether people are being treated as participants in a secure environment rather than as annoyances to be controlled. That perspective matters to beginners because it helps prevent a cynical mindset from taking root early. Security is stronger when it is firm, clear, and respectful at the same time. Documentation and follow-through are also part of professional ethics, even if they sound less exciting than incident stories or technical defense. When important work is done, decisions are made, or exceptions are granted, there should often be a record that shows what was known, what was approved, and who accepted responsibility. This supports accountability and helps protect the organization from confusion later. It also protects the professional because ethical conduct is easier to see and defend when decisions are traceable rather than informal and easily denied. Due diligence appears in reviewing records, confirming responsibilities, and making sure important steps are not skipped just because the situation feels routine. Due care appears in maintaining accurate documentation where it is needed and not treating governance practices as meaningless paperwork. For beginners, this is a useful reminder that professionalism is not only visible in meetings or technical work. It is visible in whether your actions leave behind a clear, responsible trail that others can rely on when questions arise later. As you think about exam scenarios or future workplace situations, a helpful habit is to ask what kind of trust is being tested. Is the issue about acting carefully enough with sensitive information? Is it about checking enough facts before making a decision? Is it about telling the truth when a problem exists? Is it about resisting pressure to ignore process? Is it about handling authority with humility and restraint? When you ask those questions, ethics stops sounding like a separate chapter and starts sounding like the quiet logic behind many security choices. That is one reason this topic belongs in foundational study. Entry-level professionals do not need to wait years before ethical conduct matters. It matters the first time they receive access, the first time they see something sensitive, the first time they make a mistake, and the first time someone asks them to take an easier but less responsible path. Good security judgment is strengthened every time ethics shapes what happens next. As we close, remember that professional conduct, due care, due diligence, and ISC2 ethics all point toward the same larger truth. Cybersecurity is a trust profession as much as it is a technical profession. Due care means acting with appropriate caution and responsibility, so preventable harm is not ignored. Due diligence means paying attention, asking questions, reviewing conditions, and following through so that responsible action is based on real understanding. Ethics gives these duties their deeper purpose by reminding you that security decisions affect people, organizations, and missions that deserve honest and careful stewardship. Professional conduct is the daily visible form of that stewardship in how you speak, decide, document, protect, escalate, and respond under pressure. If you carry that mindset forward, you will not only study this topic more effectively, you will also begin building the kind of judgment that makes technical knowledge truly trustworthy in practice, which is exactly the kind of foundation a serious security career needs from the very beginning.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.